Okay, everybody. It is 7:31, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time and try to get started as close to possible as we can go. During this little early phase, there'll be some people hitting the chat where they'll have to admit, so I might get distracted for a second while I admit them into the webinar. First, I want to thank everybody for showing up today. I'm really pleased with the turnout, and I hope today's information is useful. I do want to I'm always trying to be respectful of people's time. So I do want to try to get through. It's scheduled for an hour and a half. I imagine the presentation will take about an hour and 15 minutes or so. And there's some time for Q&A after that. So we'll sort of move through things. And anything that you have questions after the meeting, you're welcome to send me an email. You should have my email. And then finally, there's a couple downloadables I'm going to have, packing lists, both like camera gear checklists and more generic gear checklists that can be handy as you prep for a trip or anything like that. That'll be available. And I'm planning on making the presentation available as a PDF as well. So again, that's for anybody that registered, whether you're here or not, or whether you leave partway through, whatever, you'll be able to get that just in case you've got somewhere to be and you're going to miss part of it. So like I said, I will casually watch chat here and there for questions, but I am going to try to keep things moving along. So with that, let's dive in. So my name is Jeffrey Tadlock. I am a landscape photographer based out of Ohio. I do a fair amount of traveling in the Midwest and over to West Virginia, southwestern United States. Traveling for me typically involves either plane flights or driving through all of that. I also have a YouTube channel, Jeffrey Tadlock Photography, where I do educational videos and behind the scenes and vlogs and things like that. If you're interested in checking that out, the link's up on the screen. I do run workshops locally. One of our local areas, there's a place called Hocking Hills State Park, which is about an hour from me. It's recently been getting a lot of attention, being one of the top 50 places in the world, according to Forbes magazine. So it's a pretty cool place. And I also do workshops out in West Virginia as well, in the Blackwater Falls area. And some of those trip planning for some of those, you'll see that'll be some of the behind the scenes you see there. I focus a lot on domestic travel. However, all the tips, tools, and things like that apply to international travel. And I do have some international travel tips along the way. So while a lot of my examples are US-based domestic locations, either at the end of a flight or a car trip or anything like that, the tools, tips, tricks can also apply to international in the same way I would research an international location is how I'd research a local organization. So here's what we're going to cover in today's webinar. We are, first, thanks for attending. Really appreciate it. Here's some of the topics that we're going to cover. We're going to cover choosing a location and some of the things to consider when you're choosing a location. Helpful to know as you start your choosing. Sort of researching a location, how do you narrow those locations you want to go down? Or maybe you already have a place in mind. I'm going to talk about how to research that more in depth and some of the tools I use to do that. Talk about travel tips. And my travel tips range from driving to a place to flying and everything in between. So I've got some travel tips just to make that trip a little easier. Talk about what to pack when you go on a trip based on how long the trip is, what kind of camera gear you might want to take, some of my clothing strategies and such when I travel, depending on climate. And then finally, once you get to the location, I just have a couple tips and tricks just to sort of make that experience enjoyable and keep that schedule flexible while you're on location. So we're going to cover that as well. So choosing a location, we're going to talk about the things to consider, some of the initial research I do, and some of the tools I use to sort of perform that research. So there's 4 things I like to consider when I'm trying to decide where I'm going to go and what I'm going to do. The first one's length of the trip. If it's a weekend trip, it's going to limit where I may or may not go. It might change how I would travel. Maybe it's a long weekend trip, which might let me get a little further away, or maybe it's a week-long trip or even longer. So one thing I keep in mind is what's the length of the trip going to be as I'm trying to choose a location, because that'll influence where I might want to go. The time of year, as you're looking to go somewhere, there's certain places that are better at certain times of year than other times of year. So if, for example, if it's July, even if I have the opportunity to go to Death Valley National Park in California in the US, it would be extremely hot and not hospitable conditions to go out there. So you want to consider the time of year. If you're trying to get a fall trip, you want to make sure you're going someplace where there's going to be lots of fall colors, maybe, aspens in Colorado or something like that. So you want to factor in the time of year for your trip. The type of landscape you want to photograph. This one's probably a little bit of an obvious one, but as you're thinking about it, this has been a consideration for me as to what might sway me one way or the other, whether I want to go photograph some waterfalls, do I want to go to the mountains? Sometimes when you have 2 places that are sort of equidistant, just knowing what you want to photograph and what opportunities will be present at a location will influence which location you're actually going to choose to go to. And finally, are you going to drive or fly? Driving, it's convenient. usually not as much money, but it takes longer to travel. And if flying is an option, then that might let you obviously get further away, do more international travel, fly to Iceland, anything like that. So choosing whether you're driving or flying is going to be an impact on what you can fit into the length of time that you have. Using those 4 considerations, sometimes you're going to know the location right away. You've got this dream location and you already know what it is, and you finally got the vacation time or the gap of time to go do it, so you know where you want to go. But maybe I've got this sudden 4-day weekend and I'm trying to figure out where can I go in that 4 days. And that's what we're going to dive into first. If you're still looking for a location, some tips and tricks to choose one that's within your range that fits in your available time. So first, determine what's in your travel range. And there's sort of 2 ways you're going to decide whether you're flying or driving. And if you're flying, it can be a little tricky to determine what's in travel range. And really the best tool, the fastest tool I use for flying is I usually go to flights.google.com and at least get a rough idea of, say I'm willing to fly for 6 hours. I'll punch in a couple spots. And for me, I'm based out of Ohio in the Midwest. 6 hours can pretty much get me to the West Coast of the US, and get me up into Canada a little bit, depending on how many layovers. If I've got more like 16 hours to fly or 18 hours to fly, well, then I can start looking at trips like Iceland and things like that, because I'm starting to get those big, long travel days available to me, and I can start to travel further away. And really, that's almost the best way, in my opinion, is hit flights, start punching a couple locations, get a rough feel, just because the flight times can vary so much from whether it's a nonstop flight or whether it's going to change planes and things like that. Now, if you're driving, I've got a couple tools that will help you figure out just how far you can go. And this can also be used if you're going to make a short flight to a hub city and then drive from there. Whereas you might be pretty familiar with where you can reach in, say, 4 hours from your house, you might not be as familiar with where you can reach 4 hours after you just flew somewhere to work from there. And these 2 sites are, the first site is called Within Hours, and we're going to pull that up and take a look at the pros and cons of that. And in my favorite tools, smappin.com, which is really cool in how it calculates driving times and helps you figure things out. And the key thing is we look at these sites, what you're going to do is make a list of possibilities of where you could go. So bump over here. So Within Hours is a website. It's withinhours.com. And you can go there. And let's say I'm willing to drive 4 hours from Columbus, Ohio. And what it'll do is it will look and give me a map of about where I can go within those 4 hours. That sort of gives you your outer limits. And then from here, you can start looking at like a Google map or something like that and see what you can actually reach. Now, the one downside, I think, Within Hours is it's listing out places and cities, and like it lists out Ohiopyle State Park. And that's an amazing state park in Pennsylvania and is within about 4 hours. And it's right there. This red dot right here is Ohiopyle State Park. But what this map doesn't tell me is I drive by like 1 or 2 other really cool places between Columbus and there. So that's where it takes a little bit of research. This sort of sets your outer distance where you can go, but you still need to do a little bit of manual looking with like Google Maps and look for parks and look for sites and things that you could reach, because this is sort of showing you the outer limits. Now, this other one is smappin.com. And what's really cool about it is it figures in the drive times much better and gives, in my opinion, a much clearer idea of where you can go. And what this query is set to is this is 6 hours from Columbus, Ohio. And as you can see, I can get pretty far west because it's an interstate, and this application sort of figures that into the math of how far you can go and get pretty far. But if I start to head down in here in West Virginia, I really can't get that far because I start to get off the interstates about halfway through the trip on the slower travel. So again, I think this is a really cool tool to sort of really quickly get an idea of where you can go. And like I said, while you might be super familiar with how far you can drive from your house, if, say, I'm going to fly out to Denver, Colorado, and I want to see where I can drive, it's neat to see in other areas how far you can go. So then what I do is I take these. The last time I was doing a big trip last summer, I was trying to figure out where I wanted to go. I was in that 4.5, 5 hour range. And so I just started looking around, scrolling through Google Maps, and I looked through the West Virginia area. I looked through the Kentucky area. Looked up into Michigan up in here to see where I could reach. I'm looking for state parks. I'm looking for national parks, anything like that. Over to Indianapolis. And I just started making a list of where I could potentially go. So just as a point of example, when I was doing this research myself, I ended up with 3 places on my list. And I typically encourage people, if you're trying to narrow it down, get down to about 3 to 5 places. Much more than that, and you're still got way too much to research. But if you get it down into 3 to 5, it makes it a manageable amount to research. So in my case, I sort of narrowed it down to either like the Red River Gorge area in Kentucky. That's a park that's down in Kentucky. It's got sort of a southern portion and a northern portion. And then over in West Virginia, there's Blackwater Falls State Park, which is a park out there. And then they also have the new national park, New River Gorge National Park out there. So those are sort of the 3 that caught my interest when I was starting to look around and figure that out. So let's dive back over here. So you do that and you research those top 3 to 5 locations you've come up with from seeing what's within range and where you can go. From there, I started doing Google searches. Google's everyone's best friend. It's super easy to find more information about anything. So I would go in and I'd be like New River Gorge area, West Virginia. I'd go look up Red River Gorge, Kentucky, Blackwater Falls. And things I'm looking for are park websites. So like New River Gorge in West Virginia is a national park. So I would end up on the national park site and I would take a look through the site and see. Things I'm looking for is what are some of the big natural attractions? Is it big vistas? Is it waterfalls? Is it forests, scenic overlooks, things like that? And that's sort of what I'm looking for. The hiking trails, are they long backpacking trails where you're going to spend more like 3 nights out, big long hikes, or is it more short hikes to attractions? And I sort of do that, work my way through each of these to sort of just get a feel for what's in the place. Are there smaller state parks nearby, just outside the national park that might be worth exploring? What's within like a 35, 45-minute area of some of these premier spots? Is there more stuff to do, more stuff to see? I look for travel blogs. There's so many people out there, and this could be YouTube or it could be web-based, going out there and either vlogging their trips or recording their trips on websites that you can go through and see what kind of time did they have. They'll have pictures of things, and is it things that interest me? Does it look like an interesting thing to see or not? So I'm looking for travel blogs that come up. I can look at Google Images. Do a Google image search in these areas and just see, is the things people are taking pictures of, does it look interesting? Does the terrain look interesting? And items like that. YouTube, mentioned the vloggers. You can always find something on YouTube with someone vlogging their trip through almost anywhere in the US at this point in time and internationally, especially the big spots. Like if you want to go see what Iceland looks like and try to figure out what the Iceland trip would look like, there's just so many vlogs you can go look at to get a feel for what that area is like. Flickr, Instagram, you can do location searches on Instagram, get a feel for what people are doing. That's always a good way to get an idea. Friends, talk to your friends. If you're a landscape photographer and you have other landscape photography friends, they may have been there. When I narrowed down my spot out of my 3, I actually talked to one of my friends who really liked the area that I ended up choosing to go to. And it was sort of based on some of his pictures and some of his experience why I decided to go that route. So friends can be really valuable as well. And again, take all of those searches and compare them to your list of things to consider. How much time do you have? Time of year. Some places may not work at certain times of year, not work as well. Type of landscape you want to photograph and how you're going to get there, because that's going to, impact your distance to get there. So other items to consider as you dive into this: are permits required? Some areas are going to require permits, whether it be an international trip or a US trip, a domestic trip, or anything like that. Do they require permits? Does the park require a permit? Is there any kind of restrictions that could be in place? Now, where I would usually find this type of information would be on the park website, and I would look around and just see what kind of permits. And the United States right now, our national parks are just swamped and swarmed with people. And our bigger parks are doing timed entry passes at certain times of the year. So to visit a certain place, you have to have a timed entry pass to get in. Rocky Mountains does it. Smoky Mountains, I believe, is doing it. Zion is doing it for some of the premier, like Angel's Landing and things like that. So you want to be aware of that, because if you need a timed permit or a timed entry pass and you can't get that, or maybe you've discovered you're going to be able to travel in 3 weeks and the window of opportunity to get that time permit has passed, you don't want to find yourself at a park or a location and realize you can't get in there. Some friends and I, there's a place in Arizona called The Wave, which is very popular, often photographed, requires a permit to get into. And we applied for permits on the day we could get them, and none of us were able to get a permit for that trip. So we actually had to change our travel plans because of these things. So if you haven't traveled for a while, or you're used to how it was 5-6 years ago, where you could just sort of show up and get to where you wanted to go, keep an eye out for those time permits and any other permits for the park. Lodging options. Sometimes this will impact whether you want to travel there or not. Some places are very remote and your lodging options may be camping. It may be an off-brand motel. Other places you travel to may have more of a city nearby where you can, stay in nicer hotels or campgrounds or, anything like that. You may be a person that travels in your van and doing the classic hashtag van life. And maybe you're just curious, is there a place to go boondock where you can just sort of be off the grid? Is there forest land you can go do that? Maybe that'll make a location more attractive to you. So keep in mind those lodging options to what will work for you and the people you're traveling with. Food options. Again, if you're super remote, you may need to do your own food, your own cooking, your own, bring all of your own food. That may or may not be something you're interested in doing. You may like to go do your sunrise photography, enjoy a nice lunch out in somewhat of a populous area, and then go out that night for sunset and be out doing your thing. And maybe it's important for you to have those additional food options. I've had trips before where I just had to research, is there even a grocery store near this area, or do I need to bring a lot of my own food? So being aware of your food options is something that might influence which location of those 3 to 5 that you choose. Local restaurants, grocery stores, and any kind of transportation concerns. And some of this, and we'll touch a little bit on it later too, is some areas maybe you're going to be on a forest road. So is your car capable of going where you want to go? Out west in the Southwest, there's certain places that you probably should have at the very least a high clearance all-wheel drive car versus some places even are going to want bigger four-wheel drive, higher clearance cars. So think about the transportation and what some of these places you want to see, what you would need. So I'm going to pause here real quick, take a look at the chat. If you have a question, you're welcome to put it in there. Otherwise, we will move on to, so what we've sort of worked through is you've got, you had your 3 to 5 locations. You sort of chose those based on whether you're flying, whether you're driving. You use those tools to figure out what's within distance, or maybe you flew to a location and you found out what's in distance, and you've narrowed it down to your location. So now you want to do more research. You want to dive in deeper. You've got the high level stuff, but now we're going to dive in and do even more in-depth research. So in my example before, how I got to where I wanted to go was I had the spot in Kentucky, Red River Gorge area. I had two spots out in West Virginia. All of these are about 4.5 hours away. And some of it, one of the big determining factors for me was the Kentucky area looked very similar to one of my local areas. So yes, I would have traveled. I wouldn't have been near my home normal areas, but a lot of the rocks, a lot of the waterfalls, the caves, they all looked very similar to something that's about an hour away from me. So to me, I was like, if I'm going to travel, I sort of want something different in my photography. So that, when I talked about those things to consider, the type of landscape is what sort of shifted me over to West Virginia areas. Within the West Virginia areas, one of the things that attracted me beyond just talking to my friend about the 2 New River Gorge and then the Blackwater Falls area is the variety of things to photograph in the Blackwater Falls area was pretty large. There was waterfalls, there were overlooks, there were vistas, there was short hikes, long hikes. And there was even a wilderness area within about 45 minutes away that had just this really unique landscape setting that was just super unique. So it was something different that I would not be able to photograph here and wouldn't have been available to other areas. And that's sort of what drove me into when I narrowed down my location. It's Blackwater Falls State Park area, West Virginia, near Davis, West Virginia. So what I did is I made more lists. And you can do these on a spreadsheet. I'm a little more on the tech side, so I like to put them on a spreadsheet and start there. It makes it easy for me to do. I was traveling with somebody else, so I had a shared spreadsheet so that he could add his things to the list, I could add my things to the list, and we just were able to build this big, long list of things we wanted to see in the Blackwater Falls area. We broke it down by waterfalls and everything. The things I include on these lists are the general area, meaning in Blackwater Falls, I mentioned there's one area that was like 45 minutes away. So to me, that was one area. Then there was the state park proper, what was inside the state park. That was another area to me. And then there's an area up towards Thomas, which was sort of bordered the state park, and that was another area. So I sort of broke things down into general areas. The name of the location, whether it be what the state park called it, whether what I found on Instagram, whether it's what I found on a guidebook, I sort of broke that down into a name of the location, where the actual location was. And this was typically just what road was it? Was it an intersection? Was it a mile marker 7 on this road? I mean that, and I added some additional notes. You'll see the spreadsheet I used in just a second. I'll talk a little bit more about the notes. And in GPS coordinates, if I had them or if I felt the need, some places were pretty easy to find and I didn't note GPS coordinates. Others might be a little more difficult. So then I would do those. But this is my spreadsheet that I used. And we've got the main area up there. This is just the general spot. You can see I have Blackwater Falls State Park, Dolly Sods, and in the Canaan Valley area. The feature name. So I noted like that Blackwater Falls is the name of a waterfall in the park. General location, main loop in the park. I mean, it wasn't going to be hard to find. It was on the park maps. It wasn't super hard or anything like that. But if you notice a little further down, I do have a couple that like that fourth one down talks about, if you're up for a little adventure, it talks a little bit more about more in-depth directions because it's not quite as clear. That kind of information I got from a local who, like I said, when you do your research, a lot of people are fairly friendly. This one, actually, we stayed in an Airbnb when we're out there. He was a photographer too, so I got lots of additional insight that I helped populate my spreadsheet with. Made notes, just like the first one, the waterfall, very well visited, which to me meant popular. So if I'm trying to avoid crowds and things like that, I probably wouldn't want to go at 10 in the morning. I'd want to go either super early or super late. So just little notes to let me know when I may or may not want to go. And then I didn't use any GPS coordinates on this because most of the things were labeled or clear enough to find that I didn't feel the need to do GPS coordinates. So that's sort of the spreadsheet I worked off of. Like I said, I used a spreadsheet. You could use any kind of note-keeping program or notebook or anything like this. And this is just a sample of it. We probably had 20, 25 places on the spreadsheet that my friend and I were looking at going. Like I said, at the note on the bottom here, just because you put it on the sheet doesn't mean you're going to it. It just means it's there. You've logged it as you're doing your research. All of these places I gathered through online searches, Instagrams, YouTube videos, just talking to people. Like I said, I got to be friends with the Airbnb host, and that's how I discovered some of these places was through him. Like I said, park websites, travel blogs, study maps. Don't underestimate just the power of a good old topo map. Example, for the area I went to, used a Purple Lizard map, and it's just a good old-fashioned paper topo map. You can take a look at it. One of the things when you're looking at topo maps is if you know how to read them, sometimes you can find interesting things to photograph that aren't labeled or named, which can be pretty handy if you really study them. So study maps, just take a look at them, really get a feel for the area. Google Maps is one of them you can study. Obviously, the big points of interest are typically going to be labeled on a Google map. Gaia is a GPS program and a very impressive map. We're going to take a look at both of these in a minute. Paper topo maps, like I just held up, never underestimate the power of that. There's nothing like sitting down at the dining room table, cup of coffee, topo map open, and just really studying it and seeing it. It really can keep you focused and help you find some things that other people might overlook to give you those unique photos. And again, I talk a lot about domestic areas, but these exist, internationally. All these tools work in other places. The same strategy would work for these. Google Earth is a great way to scout things out, see what things look. There's a 3D view in it and lets you sort of see things that from that 3D perspective to see what is this worth visiting? What's it going to look like when I get there? What should I be thinking about gear-wise to bring so I can capture what I want to capture? So Google Earth is a great tool. Normal Google searches, just to dig in, as you start to find names of things, you can start searching for those specific things. So one of the areas in Blackwater Falls we go to is Douglas Falls. And initially I didn't know what that was, see it on a map. Now I can start to refine my Google searches and add more information to my spreadsheet as I search those. I can go to Instagram and look for Douglas Falls. And a lot of times if you read comments and read the Instagram post, you can get hints to other areas to go. And of course, Instagram, Facebook groups, things like that. I tend to, a lot of times, at least where I'm at, there tends to be a lot of waterfall groups. Like there's an Ohio waterfalls group, there's a Kentucky waterfalls group, there's a West Virginia waterfalls group. And I know, you go out to Colorado, there's Colorado mountain groups, and they're groups full of not always professional photographers and not even always people that would call themselves landscape photographers. A lot of them are just iPhone shots, things like that. But they can be great clues to seeing falls that might not be as known to the general public by just sort of joining those groups and watching those. Even in my own local area, I discover new waterfalls all the time by staying in these groups and watching to get hints and clues of where some interesting waterfalls that aren't on the main maps are. Of course, Flickr, 500px, and then Google Images is great too to go look for what are other people taking pictures of in this area and what's interesting to me. Books, showed the maps, get books. This is a waterfalls book for West Virginia. This could be a great way to get you started, get you some Google searches going. Colorado, went to Rocky Mountains. This is a guidebook to the Rocky Mountains, and they can be super helpful if you pick them up. This is written by a photographer, and this one's done really, really well. It's by a guy named Eric Stensland. He has a photo gallery in Estes Park, and this book is written very well because he talks about the seasons, talks about what you can do if you have a short amount of time or want a short hike or a long hike, or if the weather conditions are one way or another. So some guidebooks are better than others, but don't underestimate the power of just a written book for the area you're going to. You can pick up a lot of locations from them as well. And of course, friends, we've talked about friends before, landscape photographer friends, and even non-landscape photographer friends. Maybe you just got friends that travel a lot and can just give you some insight on a specific area, even if they're not photographers, because they've seen cool things and you're going to go do, high-end photos of it. So let's talk a little bit about apps. I've talked on a couple of them, so let's sort of go through this list. We got Google Maps, Google Earth, and we're going to start diving into these. Now, in this, I'm just going to try to introduce you to the app, a little bit how I use it. Most of these, you could do an hour-long webinar on almost each one of these on how to really dig into it and really use it effectively to help pre-research your location. This is going to be sort of a high-level look at just some of the things you can do briefly with it to give you an idea. But I would recommend, if any of these catch your eye, really dig in, head to YouTube and see what's out there. Some of these have some really good tutorials on them. Some of them have tutorials by photographers and how they're using them to use it. Gaia GPS is an amazing app if you're not using it, especially when you're out on location or marking waypoints before you go out. And a new one, this one's pretty new to me, so I'm really going to demonstrate one feature from it because I'm still actually learning it really well myself. But this one feature, this is a paid app, but it's amazing. I'm going to demo that off the phone here in a couple minutes too. So let's dive into these. Let's take a look at Google. Actually, let me real quick check for questions. Okay, awesome. So we're going to dive in to the apps. So let's hit Google Maps first. So Google Maps, I mean, everybody probably knows the basics of Google Maps. You can scroll around, you can, it's obviously see probably a lot of people are using it for driving directions. I mean, Google's pretty powerful for that. You can, if you're looking for a place to eat, right up here, you can nearby restaurants. What I'm going to show you, because I feel like most people probably understand Google Maps, I'm going to show you just this one little cool thing, which is your places. What this does is you can create your own maps with your own marks in it for things you want to see. So that spreadsheet I was working on, I can actually translate that once I get it into things I want to see. So I can take that spreadsheet once I have it and start adding my own markers in here. So what I've done over here is on the left side here, you can see I've got waterfalls. So I've got them color-coded in blue. Let me hide this one. So I can color code them in blue. So at a glance, while I'm out there, or even if I'm just trying to share this with a friend, and you can share this map with a friend and really sort of direct it. It's really great if you're going to have a travel partner with you who, might not be looking over your shoulder at the map. You guys can go in and start marking these things. I usually start them on the spreadsheet and then move them into a map. Here on the overlook side, these are more overlooks. These are, where you drive up to and get sort of that grand scene. But there's a couple of roadside ones. A couple of these are ones that just exist on the side of the road that are nice little pull-offs. They're not really marked on a map. They're obvious when you drive by them, but it's a handy frame of reference. Some of these I add after I've been there because I realize, I want to be able to go back. Dalai Sads, which is the wilderness area about 45 minutes away. I've got it marked over here. It's way over here, but it's a really awesome spot and it's able to see it. Maybe I'm interested in food. Maybe I don't want to waste a lot of time scouting out where I'm going to eat, but I want to do that ahead of time. I can put in my own pins for places that seem interesting. Yes, Google's going to show you the restaurants typically, but maybe I've identified like my top 3 here, or maybe, let me get up here to Davis. So this is Davis, West Virginia up here. Maybe I want to make notes about a place. So this place was a place called Big Belly Deli that's in downtown Davis, West Virginia, and I can make notes about it. So once I've been there in a future trip, I know sort of what I liked about it, what I commented about it. We discovered a great little pizza place out there. I can make a note that huge servings. There's a barbecue place. But anyways, these are just a great way to really mark where you're interested in going, what you're doing, collaborate with a friend on these things. So Google Maps, super handy for that. Highly recommend it. Like I said, you can do the initial exploration and then start marking pinpoints of interest that you're going to want to go see. So super cool there. Next up, we got Google Earth. Probably most people have used Google Earth by now, but just in case you haven't, like I said, it can get somewhat complicated to a degree, but it's a really great way because of its 3D view to just sort of get a feel for what things are like. So here I am actually in Colorado, This is a Colorado, get an overview. It's a 3D, it's the satellite imagery from Google that you can sort of browse around. You get Moraine Park, which is one of the neat little areas down in the valleys. But say I want to go take a look at Dream Lake. Dream Lake is a place in the Rocky Mountain National Park, very popular. But if I've never been there before, I might sort of just, what am I gonna, is it worth going? Get a little more in-depth view of what it looks like. So I just search for Dream Lake, come in here, here is Dream Lake. So I come back here, trail comes in, turn the map like this. And if we look up, see how, so I can change it in this 3D view, and we start to see what you would see if I was standing at Dream Lake. So this is really handy to pre-scout places. You can see people's pictures, but maybe you're wondering what's the trail like up to it? What's it look like around to the left? Or what do I think the sun's going to do when it comes across? So Google Earth is really cool to be able to sort of explore and do that. International trips, if you're trying to go, you know, the Iceland's a great example. You've seen the pictures, but you tend to see just what the person's taking a picture of. What about what's a little to the left? Maybe you want a different composition and you want to scout out ahead of time, is there a different composition? So Google Earth can be really cool from that standpoint as well. Next one, Gaia GPS. If you're not using Gaia GPS with your landscape photography, if you're doing anything that's a little bit off the road, it is a super, super useful tool. Take this to Dream Lake as well. What Gaia GPS is, so there's a browser version and there's a phone version. We'll take a quick peek at the phone version as well, because there's two big things that you can do with Gaia that I think are useful. You can sort of you can set waypoints, somewhere like Google Maps, but unlike here, your waypoints, you can, let's dive in here. This is what we just looked at on Google Earth. This is Dream Lake, Emerald Lake. Well, I can set waypoints so that I can know I want to go see something. So I can just come in here, put a waypoint down here. So I can save a waypoint. So as I explore and see certain things I want to do, I can put them in here. And then when you're out in the field, you can sync it to your phone so that you can use those waypoints to get from place to place. I sometimes use it too if I'm out hiking. When I was out in Blackwater Falls, some of the falls are a little trickier to access, like where's the trail actually start, where's the route go down. I'll set waypoints so when I go back and visit in the future, if it looks a little different, I'll know where I'm going and do that route. Let's do, so it can also do routes. So say I am, I'm going to zoom in here. So if you're going to Dream Lake, you're going to go to Bear Lake parking area, and that's where you're going to start. If I want, I can put in a route before I go, which will sync to my phone. So if I'm at home here in Ohio, I can put in these routes, and for the most part, it's smart enough to follow the trail as it goes. So I can go through, find trails, and set my route, and then sync it to my phone so I can go. In this case, these trails are somewhat evident, though in the wintertime they're covered with snow, so they're not quite as evident. So it can be handy to create those routes before you go. Let me show you real quick on the phone. What I like about it is, so this is a phone screen right there. This is set to Columbus. But say I want to set a waypoint exactly where I'm at. And you can come in here and add a waypoint, and you can either add it just as a waypoint and then sort of move it to where you want to go, or you can add a waypoint to my location. And this is where it's super handy, where I was talking about what if trying to remember where that access to a certain waterfall is at. Seasons can change, things can look different. Maybe you only get someplace every once in a while, and you can just click add a waypoint, and it just put a waypoint where I am right now. It uses the phone GPS to do that. Super cool. Use that feature a lot. The other note with Gaia GPS is it uses the phone's GPS. So even if you don't have cell signal, the GPS will still work. You can download the maps offline, and you don't need data that way. And a lot of places I go with it, I don't have data. So I download the maps offline, and it will work. The GPS will work without a cell signal. So very helpful from that. Got a question in chat. How do you save your pins and locations? Let me go on my folders. I think I can show this. So you can create folders to save your locations. So you can take your pins and stuff, and then you can move them into folders so that you have them grouped together. So, and to Google Earth or Google Maps. I had pins saved in Google Maps. I'm getting questions out of chat in the question was about pins and how I saved them. So I have pins saved here. Is this where you're talking? Okay, I can cover that real quick. So let me just start over just so it's super cool. Okay, so here I am in Google Maps. I'm going to go to your places. It's underneath the little hamburger menu up there. You go over to maps. These are the ones that I've created and done myself. So I'm going to do Davis, West Virginia. This is the non-editable version. Once I open it in my maps, I now have an editable version of the pins. And if I want to create a new pin, there's this little up here. It says add marker. Just click add marker and you can just drop it right there. It's going to give me a chance to name it. I can put in a little description. I can attach a photo, which can be pretty cool. Like if you know you're going to want to go, you think this is going to be a cool scene at sunrise, but you're there in the mid-afternoon, you can at least sort of remind yourself why you did something. Once you've done that, you can change the color of the pen. You can change the icons of the pens. If you're slightly more organized than me, you can give it waterfalls. You can give it all sorts of icon choices from there and do that. So Google Maps is how I was saving the pens. And I think the key is get it into my maps and then right up there, add marker, and that will let you start placing markers up there. And then these are layers. So I have a waterfall layer, so I can group my waterfalls into that. Think of a layer as sort of like a folder. And then same for overlooks and food and things like that. So hopefully that helps, Cindy. So let's bounce. Okay, Gaia, like I said, Gaia is super powerful. Highly recommend trying to learn how to use it. There's a lot of features to it between its routes, route finding. There's even a way to turn on public tracks, which I'll use if you, now I don't make my tracks present to everybody because sometimes I'm going to a place that could be potentially sensitive and I don't want to draw a lot of crowds. But there's a way to do layers where you can see other people's tracks through an area, which would be interesting to see if other people have found routes through things. So Gaia is a super powerful tool. And my last one I want to demo, and like I said, this is a newer one to me, and it's on the phone. So let's get it up over here. This is an app called Plan It Pro. You can see it right up there, Planet Pro. I just discovered this one somewhat recently. This is a paid for app, but it's pretty awesome. So let's move this guy over here. Okay. So where I am at, what this app does, I'm just going to demonstrate one feature because I think if you see this one feature, you're going to want to dive into this and take a look at this app. And it's great for planning and like some very detailed planning. It actually is very similar to if you're used to something like Photo Pills or one of those apps. Very similar to that, but I find it's, I don't know, I like it a little better, and especially because of this one little feature in here. So what I've got is I've got this map set up. This is out in West Virginia. It's a place called Lindy Point. It's crazy crowded if you go at the wrong time. But what this app can do is I've chosen my location. This is an overlook, and I can put it in viewfinder mode by clicking this little button here. Oh, before I do that. So I've got this set to what aperture I want to do, what focal length, and that'll help. It'll actually help show you what things are going to look like at that focal length through this AI type piece. But if I do this viewfinder VR, what this is going to do is I've placed my camera on this viewpoint in the app, and it is now showing me what that scene looks like. So in this is a valley here, and you can see here the sun is here. And what I've been trying to capture, because every time I'm out there, the sun sets a little more to this right-hand side of the frame. So it doesn't set like right into the valley. Well, this app lets me choose what do I want to find. Sunrise, sunset, I can do moonrise, full moon, different quarters of the moon. So maybe I think, you know, a quarter moon would look really cool here. In this case, this is faces west. So there's, you know, the sunset is what I'm going to choose because what I'd really like to do is get the sun coming through here. But I can set this viewfinder to be, where do I want the sun to be? And if you notice up here, it is changing the results up here. It went to 20 results because I shrank this down. If I open it back up, now I get 30 results. So let's shrink it down because I really just sort of want the sun to pass through this area. So I go up here to the top where it says 21 results. I click that. These are all the dates that the sun will pass through that little viewfinder on that app. So, for example, February 8th, there's where the sun's going to hit in that viewfinder. And I can start choosing different dates and changing what it looks like. And then say I'm like, well, okay, there it is right there. It's in my viewfinder, but how's the sun actually going to move the whole way? I'm scrolling down at the bottom of the screen and watch. The sun comes through and catches just that edge of the viewfinder. Super handy planning tool. Like I said, every time I've been out there, the sun's been setting more to the right. And I'm like, I'd really like to get it there. And this app just made it so easy to figure out what dates I should head out there and capture that shot. So it's, just think about that you could do waterfalls, maybe you're a moonrise, a moonset, any place you want to go, you can use this app, place your camera where you're going to be, configure that viewfinder to show where you want. You can choose sunrise, sunset, moon, any of those items and find it. So super cool tool. I'm still learning it, or I would dive more into it, but that was just one of the features that makes me think people should be taking a look at this app and giving it a whirl. Let's bounce back. I'm going to one more check on questions. Awesome. We're looking good there. So those are the apps I use. Like I said, very high level views. Google Maps is handy because you can drop the pins. Google Earth to sort of get a 3D view of things. Gaia, because you can drop waypoints that you can either do ahead of time so you know how to get somewhere. You can put routes on it to make route finding a little easier if you're going to a location in the snow and the trail may not be as obvious. And then that Planet Pro has a lot more features to it, but I just find that viewfinder one just awesome. So now what? So now it's time to start grouping your list. You have your list of places, either in that spreadsheet or maybe you've already moved them over to Google Maps to have. So the way I like to start organizing my list is I like to keep the following things in mind. How long is the trip? Because remember, I said my spreadsheet has like 25 different places. And my first trip out to Blackwater Falls, I think we spent 2 full days out there. So we had an evening when we got there, spent 2 full days, left after early afternoon the next. So I really only had like 2 full days and a couple half days out there. So I can't go see all 25 of those in one trip. So you got to start thinking, how long is my trip, and start prioritizing what you want to see based on that list. How close together are the different locations? Some stuff's nice and close together, and other parts were like 45 minutes away. So I start thinking about it in that way as I'm going through this list. I'm sort of prioritizing what do I want to see and how close together are they? Because if a couple things are real close together, they're easier to see in one morning. Think about the locations which are best at sunrise and best at sunset. This picture here on this slide is actually from that viewpoint that was in the camera that in that just last app, Planet. This is obviously a sunset place. I mean, it looks good during the day too, but it's a sunset place. So when you're trying to map out your schedule, your plan, where are you going to go, be thinking about that, because going here at sunrise would not be as cool. It'd still be pretty cool, but not as cool as a sunset. So think about that. Is this location best at sunrise? Is it best at sunset? Is it better on overcast days or sunny days? So you want to be thinking about it. Obviously, you don't know what the weather's going to be when you're there, but if you're thinking and sort of grouping your list like this, when you're actually out there, you'll have a better idea of where to go and when to go there. And even what I'm telling you, plan is keep it flexible, but I recommend having some plan to keep from being overwhelmed. And my example of this is I don't like to overplan. I like to have a deliberate idea of what I want to do. And my example is I find if I don't plan much, I end up becoming overwhelmed. You would think it's like if I have a plan, you get anxiety because it's going to go through or not. But my example of this is I went to Shenandoah National Park last fall, and I thought I had somewhat of a plan. But for those that don't know, Shenandoah National Park, there's a road called Skyline Drive, runs like, I want to say close to 100 miles through the ridge near the Blue Ridge Mountains out there in Virginia. And it has tons of overlooks. I think there's probably 85 overlooks. And we're talking like you drive, you pull off the side of the road, there's this great overlook. And I didn't have a good enough plan. So I get out there, it's mid-afternoon, and I know I want to catch a sunset somewhere, but I didn't know exactly where I wanted to go. So what ended up happening was I'd go to an overlook, I'd look, and then I'd be like, is this the one I really want to be at? Or is there a better one? And because I hadn't quite planned enough and done as much of my list building as I do for some of my other locations, I always felt like, should I have gone one overlook further? Or was the one I was just at better? Or so I felt like I missed stuff. It actually was somewhat of an overwhelming feeling. And I spent more time driving from overlook to overlook than if I'd just sort of planned it, thought about where I really wanted to be, and then I could have been a little more deliberate about where I was going. So that's why I encourage you to have some plan to keep from being overwhelmed, but don't overbook yourself. So it's that double-edged coin, that double-sided coin, right? Like you want to have some plans, you don't get overwhelmed, so you at least have general ideas where you want to go, but you want to overbook yourself, that you're wearing yourself out or causing that anxiety because you missed an overlook that was on your list. You were supposed to be there at X time. So you want just enough plan to know where you want to go, but keep it flexible. Maybe you're not going to see all of the places. Maybe the weather's going to shift or something like that. So that's where I try to fall into that group. Grouping your list helps with efficiency and flexibility. It helps you see several different things at once, keeps you from driving all around from one end of the park to the other end of the park and area. So keeping those is good. And then once you're out on location, review your spreadsheet notes in the evening and adjust based on energy level and weather. We're going to talk a little more about weather in a minute. But yeah, review your plan. When we were out in West Virginia, anywhere I go, I have what I think I'm going to do that day. That evening, I sit down, look at my spreadsheet. Did I get to it? Did I not get to it? Do I even want to still see it? Maybe I saw something today or learned something today while I'm out there that I want to change. So, be flexible, move through that. So let me take a real quick look here. That is a good question mark on the portrait mode or only landscape. I don't know off the top of my head. That's one I'm going to have to look. I've always used it in landscape mode, and I assume you're talking about Planet Pro as far as the view. So a good question. I'll have to look at that. Okay, back to presentation, because despite me saying I was going to respect everybody's time, I'm slipping a little behind. So we're going to sort of keep moving here. So lodging, when you're doing your more research, we've talked a little bit about this earlier, hotels, motels, you got to just sort of go with what you're comfortable with. Some people are going to sleep in their car. Some people are going to camp. Some people want a little more, you're going to be out on trails all day. So you sort of want to stay in a nice place because you want that nice clean bed, nice clean shower, nice clean room, and some eating options. So, for lodging, typically what I'm looking for in place, what's the hotel motel options? Park lodges, it can be a great place to stay because they're typically close to the park, still have the conveniences of being at least clean and, keeps you close to things, usually has a place to eat on site, which is nice. Airbnbs can nice. Sometimes you can get a good deal on an Airbnb and they can be located, nice and close to things. Camping, if you want to do camping, of course, there's different kinds of camping. There's full-on car camping, stay at like a KOA or, a private campground with super clean showers and all the facilities and entertainment you could want. And then there's all the way down to dispersed camping, which is you're pretty much driving out a couple miles away from civilization and camping just completely out in the woods. Different people, different comfort level. It's really going to be on you to know what you're comfortable with. But you want to research those in the area you're going. My big thing I consider, because really I can do any one of those four depending on who I'm with. If I'm with my family, we're probably going to be hotels, motels. I'm getting set to do a trip to Death Valley, and we're going to be living out of a van. So I can go pretty much either way depending on who I'm with. But my big consideration is being close to what I want to photograph. Make sure you don't book a place that's too far away, or you're either going to be getting up even earlier than you might want to catch a sunrise versus something nice and close. So consider the proximity. To me, that's one of the bigger things. Food, we touched on food earlier. Local restaurant options. Prepare your own food, which means you're probably going to need a grocery store, or you're going to have to bring food with you. Except my first trip out to West Virginia, I wasn't 100% sure if there was a grocery store, and if there was a grocery store, did it have everything I was going to need? So I actually brought a lot of food with us in that particular case. Or maybe a combination of both, and this is the one I tend to fall to because I tend to eat on the road to sunrises. I tend to get home late from sunsets. I tend to do a combination of both. I try to get a lunch out usually and then sort of handle my own food for early morning and evening. So that's what my note down here is think about your photography schedule. If you know you're going to be photographing, and this is the problem in the summer, you're photographing sunsets, you tend to miss dinner a lot of times because places aren't open late or something like that. So just keep that in mind as you're looking for a place, how late the places stay open, because you may need to be prepared to cook your own food or handle your own food. Let's dive into travel tips real quick, transportation and packing. First, destination regulations. Be sure to research any regulations that could affect you at your destination. We talked about this before. Permits at parks. Is there going to be a permit required? Make sure you know how to get that. Are they available? Time to entry. Make sure if it's a time to entry, don't plan a trip and then realize you get there and they're not going to let you in the park. That would just be terrible. So again, use park websites to figure this out. Works for international and domestic type travel to check these locations out. State or country regulations. Is there any kind of regulation that could impact your travel? Colorado, traveled out there in the wintertime, they have traction laws. When the weather hits a certain degree, your car has to have either four-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, a certain level tire tread depth, or if you have an accident, you'll be fully liable for any expense incurred with that. So that's sort of a state regulation that could impact your travel. Just try to familiarize yourself with that. Now, how I learned about that, Rocky Mountain National Park website, talked about traction laws. I go sort of read more about traction laws, so I was familiar with it. International travel, passports. Do you have a passport? Because if you're traveling internationally, you're going to need that. Any kind of travel restrictions. Maybe another country is going to have some form of restriction on travel. This was especially big during COVID. You could fly into certain places because of COVID and things like that. So be aware of travel restrictions as things ebb and flow. Immunizations. Some countries might have a different set of requirements for immunizations than others. So if you're traveling somewhere, while you might be fully fine in your local country, as you go somewhere else, be considering about those immunizations. Malaria things, when you go, to international locations, there's certain protocols you have to follow. So again, most state or country websites are going to sort of help cover that, but those are things to keep an eye out for as you're doing this. Like I said, use government and park sites for that kind of information. General trip prep. These are just general things when you're preparing for a trip. Most of you probably have traveled and left home on vacations and you've got these, but I just want to go over these because they're useful and handy. And make reservations. My younger me, I would show up without reservations. Older me, I like to know I have a place to stay when I get there. So make your reservations for lodging. Car rental. If you're flying somewhere, there's going to be how are you getting around? You're going to need a car. Sometimes just a standard car is going to be great. Sometimes you need something special. When I went to the Rocky Mountains in the wintertime, I wanted four-wheel drive, and I made sure I found a site that would rent me a Jeep. Didn't necessarily 100% need it, no, but I'm like, if I'm going to travel that far, I want to make sure I have a vehicle that can get where I want to go. So consider that. Maybe you're taking a lot of people with you. Maybe you're going to take you and 5 of your friends, so now you're getting into minivan territory. Go in on the cost of a minivan, or if the whole family's going. Those are the considerations to make as you head out. Pet care, if you've got pets at home, make sure they're taken care of. Don't want to forget that. Cash for the trip. I always take cash with me. I almost never use cash locally, but when I travel, I always take cash. Make sure you take cash for the trip. And if you're traveling internationally, make sure you know what you're doing to exchange into their denomination. Whether you're doing that there, whether you're taking their currency with you, make sure to keep that in mind if you're traveling. If you're traveling internationally, cell phone plan, make sure you enable data and cell phone or international travel on your cell phone. You probably don't have it enabled now unless you travel a lot. And that's something when you land, you could find out you can't use email or make phone calls. So make sure you get your international plan enabled on your cell phone. Hold your mail at home unless you have a neighbor checking it. Don't forget to mow the lawn if it's summertime because you just don't want to, make your neighbors angry. So just some general trip preparations on that front. Automobile, fairly routine for most people, but here's just a couple tips. Stay hydrated, bring water. I usually make sure I have water with me. Car snacks are always good. Car snacks help really skip that breakfast so you can go do the sunrise and then still get some other photos without this huge need to go get food. So car snacks are handy. Think about gear safety. This is one that always concerns me because I'm always traveling with this expensive camera gear in my backpack. And normally, where do you do it? Are you going to carry your backpack in with you when you go places? Do you have a spot you hide it in the car? So just think about your gear safety. I've done everything from I carry my camera bag everywhere I go to I keep a certain cover in my truck so that people can't see it. And then I even go a step further and cable things into locked cables into the car itself, which will at least slow somebody down. So think about your gear safety, what your plan is about that. You don't want your camera gear to get stolen. Make sure to lock your car when you leave it. Allow the insurance that covers cameras. If your car was unlocked, they are not going to cover your stolen gear. So make sure you lock your car when you leave it. If you are leaving expensive gear in your car, navigation, what are you going to use? Google Maps, Waze, built-in GPS, paper map. If you're still do paper maps, just think about that. Don't forget the vehicle itself. Remember to prep your vehicle for the trip. So if you're driving a place, make sure you get it, you're not right on the cusp of an oil change. Make sure your tires are in good condition and you've got air in them. You don't want to have a flat out in the middle of nowhere. A lot of the places I travel, it's going to be forest roads. I want to make sure my tire's in good shape, air. Make sure you have a plan for that. Washer fluid full. As you can see in this picture, this was a muddy, icy, snowy trip, and we had to use washer fluid all the time. Make sure that's full. Jumper cables, battery booster. I don't know. Hidden fear of mine is I'm going to be out there somewhere in the middle of nowhere and the battery's going to go dead because some weird thing happened. So I actually keep a little battery booster pack in my car for that. But at the very least, jumper cables. That way, if some passerby comes by, you can get immediate help. So don't forget some of that vehicle prep itself. Flying. So let's touch on this. So domestic flights, we'll cover that first and hit international. Domestic airline travel can be a huge stressor if you don't fly often. And just here's some tips as you pack for your trip. Check carry-on restrictions. I try to purposely make sure, at the very least, my camera bag, which I always carry on with me, can fit in the overhead bins. I prefer it if I can also slide it underneath the seats in front of me. I've had camera bags that can do that, and that's super nice because if the overhead bins are full, you can always sort of slide it in underneath the seat in front. These days, I'm carrying enough gear that I just bank on the overhead bins. I've sort of switched that. Carry-on restrictions, things like what can't you carry on? I tend to carry a pocket knife in my camera bag. Before I fly, I always have to remember to take that out and either not take it or put it in the checked luggage. Likewise, batteries, lithium-ion batteries, things are going in cameras and a lot of the devices and things like that. You can't check those batteries. They actually need to be in your carry-on. The TSA and airline websites are really good at outlining that. Just go read them, make sure you understand them, and that part won't be that stressful. My past few times through TSA, it's actually been pretty easy to get through with the camera bag. Haven't had to unpack nearly as much. But if you're familiar with those rules by viewing the airline's website and TSA site ahead of time, that'll just make it easier. Carry-on sizes, I already talked about. That just make sure your carry-on fits within their size limits. Like I said, plan to carry on your camera gear. I carry on all my cameras. I carry my tripod with me too, but I usually take the ball head off so it fits in nice and snug so I don't draw attention to myself. It straps to the side of my pack. I take the ball head off and I pull it, just cinch it really tight to the pack. I've never had any problem taking my tripod on. I do not take my spiked feet though. I just don't want them to even question that. So I just have the rubber feet on when I fly with them. My camera bodies go in my checked bag. My lenses go in my carry-on bag. Camera bodies, carry-on bag. Lenses go in my carry-on bag. My batteries in my carry-on. Those are what I carry on. If that's getting to be heavy, I would probably trust putting my tripod in a checked bag. I've done it before, a spare tripod for video work. I would probably trust that. I would at all costs try not to ever have my camera bodies, lenses, and such checked though. Just try to keep that bag cinched nice and small so you don't attract a lot of attention. International flights, some of those can have some additional items to consider. The carry-on sizes might be smaller. So domestically, we're fairly decent unless you're on one of those little regional jets, which can sometimes be a problem. But the larger jets for cross-country flight, not too bad. International, your carry-on sizes could be smaller. So if you're flying internationally, maybe you've flown all the time domestically, make sure that internationally your bag still works. You might need a slightly smaller bag. Any other additional restrictions around batteries, liquids, anything like that, just check for those. And don't forget the passport for international travel. Just make getting through a little easier. Packing camera gear, some of the basics for that. You want to make sure you take your camera bodies. And I have checklists I'm going to provide, so don't worry about that. But camera bodies, you obviously want those. Lenses, I default towards a wide lens, a mid-range lens, and a telephoto lens. If you don't have 3 lenses, take what you've got. Or if you're trying to travel really light, look for just a nice versatile lens. I'm a Nikon shooter, so a 24-200 lens is super versatile if I'm trying to keep things really light. Memory cards and readers if it's a longer trip, or you're really concerned about backups, make sure you take your readers as well. So not just your memory cards, but some readers so you can back those photos up. Batteries and chargers, so make sure you get your battery. Make sure you take a charger so you can charge them up while you're out there. If you have filters, make sure you take your circular polarizer, your ND filters, make sure you've got those packed. Tripod and tripod head. I shoot almost all my landscape photography off of a tripod, so make sure you've got your tripod and tripod head. I like to take something to clean my cameras with, my lenses with, and sometimes even a sensor on the fly. So I tend to like to take a rocket blower. I've got a small little rocket blower. You can just blow things off. Either it works to clean the lens or off of a sensor. So a rocket blower is super handy. I like to take those. Take a lens cloth. I like to photograph waterfalls, or maybe you're out in some drizzle. It's nice to be able to wipe that front element and lens down. So make sure you take that on your trip. More advanced, are there specific gear choices based on location? 1 or 2 camera bodies. If you have 2, I tend to take 2. Maybe it's a short trip, or maybe it's a trip I'm really trying to keep things light. I might go with 1, but that's something to consider if you want to take 2 camera bodies with you as a backup. Lens choices, like I said, I tend towards a wide, a mid, and a telephoto if you have them. But if you don't have them, you may just have to go with what you've got, which is great. But sometimes where lens choices can get big is I have a 100-400 versus a 70-300. My 100 to 400, I like when I'm going to be in mountains, big vistas, because I really might want to punch in. If I'm in more of a woodland, sort of a tighter foresty type area, I probably don't feel like I need my 100 to 400, and I'll save some weight and take a 70 to 300. So just be thinking about the terrain you're going to, and that'll help influence what you're going to do for that. Filters, circular polarizers, ND filters. I always like to have a CPL, circular polarizer if I can, ND if you have them. Drones, a lot of people are photographing with drones. The drone choice to me is really how restrictive is the area I'm going to. When I went to the Rocky Mountain National Park, there's no drones in national parks. I didn't even take my drone because the majority of my time was going to be, and essentially what would be a drone restricted area. If I'm going to a state park where the drone rules are a little more relaxed, then I might take my drone to get some shots with that. So that's a consideration. Now let me check questions real fast. Awesome. Okay. Clothing. So clothing can be tricky, right? Weather changes. Always be prepared for fluctuations. And because of that, layers, layers, layers. It's the key to dressing, being comfortable in your conditions. Base layers, these are usually long sleeve, thin, fit tight to the skin, helps pull the sweat away from the body, which is actually what makes you cold. Pants or shorts, you are the one that knows whether you're warm-blooded, cold-blooded, to which one you need to go. I can wear shorts in cooler weather than, say, my wife can. So you just sort of have to know your body temperature from there. Convertible pants, as dorky as they look, are great. I love them because they're super flexible and helps me keep my pack size down. I can take a set of convertible pants and be ready for anything. So I know they don't look cool, but they work. Shirts, either a t-shirt or a tech shirt, something more of a tech material, again, help wick that sweat away from your body. That's what makes you cold, is when you sweat and it can't get away from your body. So tech shirts, I like to pack those in. They go over top of the base layer. Hiking socks, I tend to wear a very sturdy boot when I go, just because I'm carrying a heavy camera bag. I know what type of hiker I am, so I always have hiking socks. They also help keep your feet warm if you get wet, if you're doing some creek crossings. Like I said, boots, I wear a sturdy boot. What works for me may not work for you, but for my backpacking background, I just always like boots. Footwear for water. If you're going to do a lot of stream crossing or anything like that, footwear for water. And this can be difficult if you're traveling far. Like if you're flying, it's hard to bring along a set of muck boots that are going to keep your feet dry. So if I'm going someplace warm and flying, I'll take a set of sandals and I'll use those. But just something to consider. Maybe you decide it's not worth it. You're not going to head into the water to get that perfect photo, and that's totally cool too. But I like to mention it because I tend to carry something that would work for water. Rain gear, some form of shell for yourself and your camera gear often too. But rain gear so that you can go out. I like a wide-brimmed hat. Hat here, I was thinking knit hat, but also a wide-brimmed hat. I wear glasses. I hate getting water spots in my glasses, so a nice brimmed hat works great there. Gloves if it's going to be cold. I use flip-top gloves when I'm out in the super cold, and sometimes a little lighter glove when I'm not, so don't forget gloves, and the sunglasses. If you're in someplace bright, it's nice to have the sunglasses out there. But again, the key is layers. This approach has worked for me very, very well, from warmer climates all the way to some pretty cold, windy stuff in the mountains, and it works pretty well. Gaiters, if you're doing a lot of snow, those are the things that sort of keep snow from getting into your boot and helps keep the bottom of your pants getting snow covered. So if you're doing a lot of snow and soft snow, gaiters can be handy as well. Okay, I am running slightly longer than I said I would. I'm going to keep moving through. We're getting there. And there haven't been a lot of questions, so that helps. So once you're there, you've done all this planning, you're there, you've got your gear packed, you've got your everything packed, and you've arrived. So you have your list of areas in the region. You have your rough plan so that you're not getting overwhelmed, have a general idea of what you want to do. You have your camera gear packed. You have your appropriate clothing. You got your layers. You're ready for the elements. You have food and water figured out. Now you're there to have fun. So if you've done all of this, you're probably going to be able to have a real good time. You've got a plan. You know what you're after. You can pretty much at this point sort of relax and then just enjoy the trip. Weather's the one thing that you couldn't have predicted too far ahead. So things to keep an eye out for weather-wise when you're on a trip. Dramatic sunrises and sunsets. Overcast, sunny. What's the weather going to be? Rain, or is it going to be dry? Is it going to be hot, or is it going to be cold? These are things to keep an eye on, and they can change. I've been on trips where I thought the temperature was going to be 50 degrees, and it's actually ended up being in the teens, which is why the layered clothing approach is important. But this is something that changes. It changes fast, and these are things that can change day to day. So once you're on location, weather's almost the biggest thing I start keeping an eye out for, because my list have me knowing where I want to go. I've probably grouped them by whether they work well in overcast skies, sunrises, sunsets. Is it going to be a good sunset, bad sunset? So keeping an eye on weather is important. So these are the weather websites I use on a pretty regular basis, both in planning and heading out and once I reach a spot. I tend to use Wonderground. This one you can swap out. There's nothing super special about Wonderground. If you're more of a weather.com person, keep using weather.com. This is my quick, what's the weather like today? Like if I was just a normal person in the city, not going out photographing. It's just my highs, lows, wind, any warnings I should be aware of. Does it look like it's going to rain? And is it going to be cloudy or not? So this is my high level weather app, wonderground.com. Windy.com is a great app. Super cool. I'm going to actually show a little bit of windy.com so you can see what it looks like. Very handy for predicting cloud cover, seeing what the weather's really doing, learning how to predict fog, the whole bit. Windy's another one of those topics you could dive into for an hours to really master it. I'm going to give you at least a high-level view to maybe get you to see why you should go take a look at that particular app. Weather.gov is good. It's very simple. It's very plain. Doesn't look fancy, but it's got some cool forecasting modules in it. And this one's super handy. iWeatherNet.com for past rainfall info. So just in the interest of time, I'm going to show you Windy real quick, and then iWeatherNet.com, weather.gov, just go check it out, take a look. Some of its forecasting is just very clear and to the point. It's not all fluffed up to try to sell ad dollars, so it's just clear, to the point, and useful. But let's dive in and take a real quick look at Windy because it is worth looking at if you've never seen it before. So windy.com, there's an app available on the phone too. And this is how it comes up. And you can set your favorites over here on the left. I've got a couple of favorites. I got West Virginia, Death Valley, my hometown, a local park, Southwest, Tucson's where I tend to go when I go to this travel to the Southwest. Works internationally. I'm sort of showing domestic U.S. what I'm most familiar with, but anywhere in the world, Windy is good. Pulls its weather from multiple sources. You can even choose which sources you're going to do. By default, it's showing you the wind, and you can see the wind is coming through Ohio pretty briskly. Right now, it's 15 miles an hour. I just clicked on that and showed that. Now, here's where Windy is cool. Clouds shows me the cloud cover. So we're under a lot of clouds right here. So if you're trying to predict sunrises, sunsets, you sort of want that. You sort of want clouds, but then you need a little bit of an opening for the sun off on the horizon. So this can help you figure out where the clouds are. So for example, one high-level rule of thumb is get a good sunrise, sunset, clouds, and a spot for the sun to pop up about 100 miles away. So if I come in here and I right-click on Columbus and I say distance and planning, and I want to know what the clouds look like between Columbus and about 100 miles west. So I set that a little too far. I can move this arrow back, get to right around. That's good enough, 997. So this is giving me a cloud profile from Columbus to the west towards Indiana. Lots of low clouds through here, clouds all the way through. There's really no break. So if there was a sunset in this particular case, probably not going to get much. We're probably going to be clouded in and can't see it. Now, if I was over here, say in this section, and say I lived right here, and I set this out, there's a chance I would get some form of sunset if obviously it was sunset time, because I've got clouds which are going to be nice and dramatic and show those dramatic colors and everything like that. And then over here it's clear, so the sun's going to go down. It's not going to be obscured off that 100-mile distance, and it's going to light up those clouds. Theoretically, it can always not go your way. But super cool planning tool if you're trying to predict that sunrise, sunset. Sunrise, just flip it to the other side, what's to your east. It can predict fog, but let's do one other thing. That's a distance. Let's do city. So this is the forecast module. I went into my hometown, and I switch it over to the media over there. And real quick on the fog thing, like I said, we could, again, this is one of those things you could spend hours on, weather prediction and how it works for landscape photography. But fog is always cool, right? So what causes fog is your temperature and dew point are within a degree or two, maybe 3 degrees, and light winds. Well, if you look at this map right here, you got your temperature through here, 33. My temperature, my dew point is 31. And you see how this line gets real narrow? You can look at this, and when that line right here, see, it's real thick over here because there's a big difference between the temperature and the dew point. I get over here, it's 32, 31. Temperature and dew point look pretty good for a little bit of fog, but the wind's 19, so there's not going to be fog. So it's going to blow it away. But if you keep an eye on this, I've learned through Windy, I can predict foggy mornings before the weather starts to announce fog warnings. So super handy tool. I haven't even scratched the surface of what it can do with that, but this is another one of those tools like Gaia GPS. If you're looking to really learn how to plan and adjust to the weather when you're on location on your trip, whether it's internationally or domestic, windy.com is a great resource to go check out and start to navigate and play with. I don't use it for necessarily my regular, I just want to see what the weather's like today. I tend to use something like Wonderground or something like that, but super handy for that. And off of that, last cool weather tool. This tells you how much rain has happened in the past X amount of time. So I have an area near me that has lots of waterfalls if there's been enough rain. So if it's dry in the summer, the waterfalls aren't going to run. So I will plan and base my trips on how much rain has fallen. So right now, this is set to 72 hours. How much rain? I can change that if I want. I can make it 1 hour, 3 hours, but it's a historic rainfall that happened somewhat, within the past these time frames. Super, super handy if you're photographing waterfalls or you don't want to walk out in a ton of mud or something like that. Because I go in here, I click in this approximate area, they've had 0.16th of an inch over the past 72 hours. So if I want to photograph waterfalls, they're probably not running as strong as they could be. You come over here though into Arkansas, they got 5 inches of rain in the past 72 hours. So super handy tool if you're trying to plan, if you're on location and your trip relies on knowing how much rain has there been in the past couple hours or past day or 3 days. Super handy. It could make or break a trip for me. For, like I said, the state park that's about an hour away from me, I may not go on a trip if it hasn't rained enough, or if I'm watching the weather and they're predicting rain, and this lets me know if they actually got that rain and what the falls are probably going to look like. So super cool tool there. Let's pull back the presentation, check for questions real fast. Awesome. Let's bounce back over here. Okay. In the home stretch, folks, and sorry, I guess I talk more than I think I talk. So summary, what we've covered: choosing a location and things to consider, researching a location. So whether it be that initial research to find those first 3 to 5 or narrowing that 3 to 5 down to your final choice. Travel tips, how to be prepared for travel, what to pack, on location tips. That's sort of what we covered. At the end of this webinar, within 24 to 48 hours, I will send the recording, and I'm going to send you these packing checklists. These are packing checklists that I use to help make sure I've got everything. Obviously, my exact same carry is not your exact same carry, but these should be pretty solid starting points that if you took just what was on these lists, you're probably not going to be too disappointed. So I've got a camera gear checklist I'll be sharing. I have a general gear packing list I'll be sharing. And then I'm going to share a combined list because sometimes you might just want the camera gear if it's a day trip. General gear could be good for non-photography, I guess. But sometimes I want to make sure I've got everything. So there'll be 3 lists: camera gear, general gear, and then a combined list. I think they'll be pretty helpful. Like I said, I pulled these off of the checklist I keep in my own notes to make sure I'm remembering everything. So super cool there. One other quick thing on camera gear, it didn't make it into the presentation, but I was thinking about it here. One of the tricks I use for that is I use tech pouches. So we were talking about batteries and card readers and everything like that. I keep all of that in tech pouches. So all my card readers sit in one tech pouch, and I use it at home. If I need to read a memory card, I get my tech pouch, I plug it in the computer, and when I'm done with it, I put it back in the tech pouch. Extra batteries for my camera bag is in a different tech pouch. I keep the batteries in there. They just always go in there. So that bag goes into my camera bag. The reason I highly recommend this is it makes packing your camera bag so much less stressful because you've been living off of this tech pouch for your daily needs. So if you just zip it up, throw it in your camera bag, when you're off on the road, you've got everything you need because it's the same setup you've been using at home for while you're on the road. I meant to have that in there in the presentation earlier, but tech pouches they've made my packing go so much easier and more confident that I'm leaving with all the camera gear I need. Super helpful. Question answer. Let me dive in. I'm going to pause for a second. First question over here, Leslie, can you give me necessary phone app names again? Yes, so phone app, Gaia GPS is one. It's web-based and has a phone app. Both are super useful. I like to use the web-based for the planning because I get the nice big screen. I like to use the phone app when I'm out in the field because I can take advantage of either setting waypoints or having routes or a tracking ability. So that's one phone app I highly recommend. Windy.com is also web-based or phone-based, and phone-based, super handy for that weather and predicting the weather. The cool viewfinding app that was sort of telling you where the sun was at was called Plan It Pro. That is unfortunately a paid for app, but it seems really cool. Really like that viewfinder. But Plan It Pro, I think those were the phone apps that I covered. Of course, Google Maps works on the phone. Several of those apps work in both places, but yeah, that's it. My tech pouch. Where did I get my tech pouches from? I think I have one sitting in here right now. So these are nothing fancy. These are the tech pouches I use. This is my mid-size one. It is from a company called Mystery Ranch. These are actually, they have some on their site, a different version of these, but really anything that's like this is just a canvas bag, brightly colored, so it's easy to see inside. This one has a memory card reader, a cleaning brush, things like that. I try to keep 3 of them, mid-sized one for like card readers, slightly bulkier things, an SSD drive can go in here. And then I have my smaller one, which is my camera battery. So I have a small one and I have a larger one. But really, any tech bag that just sort of lets you organize, subdivide. These were not expensive. These were like $15 tech bags. But I just found the organization system just made my life so much easier. If you haven't used tech bags, get in the habit. It makes leaving for a trip so much less stressful that you're going to forget something. Again, I just want to thank everybody for showing up. I appreciate it. I hope you got some good information out of it. And thanks for coming.